Have you ever looked at your own child and wondered when, exactly, the person you raised disappeared? When the bright, curious kid you poured your heart into was replaced by a stranger wearing their face, a stranger who looks at you not with love, or even with the casual indifference of youth, but with the cool, calculating assessment of an obstacle to be managed, or worse, to be used. I'm Samantha. I'm 62 years old, and the moment I had to face that terrible question wasn't over a holiday dinner or a forgotten birthday. It happened at 2 in the morning, in the cold blue glow of my monitors, when I discovered my own son was trying to rob me blind. And the saddest part? He thought he was smart enough to get away with it. He thought I was just some old woman who grew prize-winning roses and baked a decent lemon drizzle cake. He forgot it was me who taught him how to code in the first place. Stick around, and I'll tell you how the cocky programmer who tried to hack his mother's bank account found out, in the most spectacular way possible, that his mom was the one person on earth he should never ever have crossed. The moment I clicked send on that encrypted report, I knew two things with absolute bone-deep certainty. The first was that the career of my son, Jace, a boy genius programmer at a company that called itself the future of finance, was most likely over. The second, and this is the part that still settles like ice in my chest, was that he had absolutely no idea it was his own mother who had just dismantled his world. He was probably asleep in his minimalist downtown loft, dreaming of stock options and the next funding round, completely unaware that the legendary hacker Nix, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in the cybersecurity world, had just signed her name to his professional obituary, and that Nix was currently sitting in a suburban house 3 towns over, wearing a fuzzy bathrobe and wondering if she'd put enough water in the bird bath that afternoon. To the world, and more importantly to my son, I am a cliché. I'm a 62-year-old retiree. My days are supposed to be filled with gentle, age-appropriate activities. I have a garden that is my pride and joy, where I coax heirloom tomatoes and stubborn hydrangeas into life. I have 2 rescue cats, Hermes and Apollo, who believe the entire house is their personal fiefdom. I volunteer at the local library twice a week, helping older folks navigate the terrors of email attachments and pop-up ads. My life, by all outside accounts, is a quiet, predictable, and frankly slightly boring tapestry of comfortable semi-old age. It's a persona I have cultivated with the same meticulous care I give to my orchids. My son Jace certainly bought into it. At 28, he was everything his generation was supposed to admire. He was the lead architect at Veritix, a fintech startup that promised to revolutionize digital payments with some impenetrable blockchain-adjacent jargon that made venture capitalists swoon. He was sharp, handsome in that modern, scruffy way, and possessed a confidence so profound it bordered on a religious conviction. To him, I was his dear old mom, a sweet, slightly dotty woman who had once, a lifetime ago, taught him the basics of programming on a Commodore 64. He spoke of it with a kind of affectionate condescension, like a professional athlete recalling the t-ball league his dad used to coach. He had no concept, none at all, that the basement of my quiet, respectable house wasn't for storing holiday decorations and forgotten exercise equipment. He didn't know it was my command center, a server-cooled, lead-lined room with a direct fiber line and enough processing power to give a small nation-state pause. He saw the retired hobbyist. He forgot who taught him how to play the game. I've let him believe this for years. It's a quiet deception I've maintained for his own good. His father, my late husband Robert, had been a cryptographer for the government. He understood the world I moved in, the shadows I occupied as Nix. We made a pact when Jace was born. Our son would have a normal life. He would not be burdened by the knowledge of what his parents really did, of the digital ghosts we hunted, and the silent wars we fought. After Robert passed, I doubled down on that promise. I retired Nix from the more aggressive frontline work. I took on a more sedate, consultative role, becoming a ghost in the machine for a handful of select, high-paying clients who valued discretion above all else. I let Jace believe the money I had came from Robert's life insurance and some lucky investments. It was easier that way. It was safer. It was a lie I told myself was an act of love. The inciting incident, the moment the first crack appeared in the foundation of my carefully constructed life, didn't come with a dramatic phone call or a tearful confession. It came as a whisper, a tiny, almost imperceptible digital signature. I was up late, not because of insomnia, but because I was running a diagnostic on a new zero-day exploit that had been discovered in a popular mobile operating system. It was a hobby, like knitting, only with more hexadecimal code. That's when my personal security system, a multi-layered beast of my own design, sent a silent alert to my desktop. It wasn't the loud, clanging alarm of a brute force attack. This was different. This was a subtle, elegant probe. Someone was gently tapping on my digital windows, checking the locks, looking for a way in. My first reaction was professional curiosity. This wasn't some script kiddie using a pre-packaged attack tool. This was clever. The probe was designed to mimic routine server handshakes, to be almost invisible against the normal background noise of the internet. But my system was designed to notice the tune, not just the noise. I started tracing it. The attack was routed through a series of anonymous proxies, bouncing from a server in Estonia to one in Brazil, the standard obfuscation techniques. But the person behind it made a mistake, a small one, a rookie error born of arrogance. In the packet headers, in the very structure of the probing code itself, was a stylistic flourish, a unique way of structuring a loop, a particular preference for a certain type of variable declaration. It was like a painter's brushstroke, or a writer's use of a semicolon, and I knew it. My blood ran cold. I had seen this style before. I had nurtured it. I had praised it. It was Jace, my son. My own son was methodically, expertly, trying to hack me. The silence of my basement suddenly felt suffocating. The hum of the servers, usually a comforting white noise, sounded like a chorus of accusations. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the stillness, and felt a profound physical shock, as if I'd touched a live wire. It wasn't just that he was trying to get into my accounts, it was the how of it, the skill, the patience, the sheer unmitigated gall. He was using the advanced techniques I had taught him, the very lessons I'd imparted about logic, structure, and thinking 3 steps ahead of your opponent. He was taking the tools I gave him to build a future and using them as a crowbar to pry open my life. For a long time, I just sat there. The initial shock gave way to a wave of hurt so deep and so sharp, it felt like a physical bereavement. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation, a justification, any reason at all that wasn't the ugly, simple one staring me in the face. Maybe his account was compromised. Maybe someone was spoofing his digital signature. But I knew, with the weary certainty of an expert, that it wasn't true. This was his work. As unique and undeniable as his fingerprint, he saw me as a mark, not his mother. A resource, a simple, trusting, technically illiterate old woman with a pot of money she wasn't sophisticated enough to properly protect. That's what hurt the most. It wasn't the attempt to steal, it was the staggering disrespect, the assumption that I was a relic, a doddering parent to be managed and, when necessary, plundered. Did he think I wouldn't notice? Did he honestly believe that the woman who taught him how to bypass the state university's network security as a teenager's intellectual exercise had somehow devolved into someone who couldn't spot an intrusion into her own system? The condescension was a deeper wound than the betrayal itself. My fingers found the keyboard, and with a few keystrokes I pulled up the archives. Not my work archives, but my personal ones. I needed to understand. I needed to see the path that led from the little boy on my lap to the digital burglar at my door. the screen filled with old photographs and video files, a digital ghost of a happier time. There he was, Jace at 8 years old, sitting on my knee in this very chair. His little face was lit with pure, unadulterated joy, his small fingers hovering over the keyboard of an old machine as he watched a simple line of code make the words, "Hello World," appear on the screen. I could almost feel the memory of his small, warm weight against me, hear his gasp of delight. "I did it, Mom. I told the computer what to do," he had shouted, his voice high and thrilled. In that moment, I saw a world of potential, a mind that could build, create, solve problems. I wasn't just teaching him a skill, I felt like I was handing him a key to the future, a future I thought he would build, not break. I clicked to another file. Jace at 16. The cockiness was already there, a faint shadow around his eyes. He'd been caught hacking the school's grading system. Not to change his own grades, he was a straight-A student, but just to prove he could. He wanted to expose their weak security. I remember the principal calling, his voice a mix of fury and grudging respect. I had sat Jace down at the kitchen table, the air thick with unspoken tension. That was when I told him the truth, or a version of it. I told him about the world of hacking, the clear, bright line between using a skill to protect and using it to exploit, the white hats and the black hats. I explained the ethics, the responsibility that came with his talent. "It's not about what you can do, Jace," I told him, my voice sterner than I intended. "It's about what you should do. Power without a conscience is just vandalism." He had listened, or I thought he had. He nodded, looked me in the eye, and promised he understood. He promised he would always be on the right side of that line. Another lie, it seemed. Or perhaps a promise he had simply forgotten, like an old toy. The last memory I pulled up was from just 6 months ago, a Sunday dinner. It was after Veredix had secured a massive round of funding. He was holding court at my dining room table, expansive and brilliant. He talked about their security architecture, using a cascade of acronyms and buzzwords. I had asked a simple question, something about their data redundancy protocols. He'd actually reached across the table and patted my hand, a gesture of such profound and dismissive condescension it had taken my breath away. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it, Mom," he'd said with a smug smile. "It's next-gen stuff. You wouldn't get it." My own brother David, who was there, had just chuckled, as if Jace's arrogance was a charming party trick. In that moment, I wasn't his mother. I was part of the audience for the Jace show, an admiring, ignorant face in the crowd. The memory, which had merely stung at the time, now felt like a deliberate act of erasure. He hadn't just forgotten what I'd taught him, he'd actively rewritten our history to make himself the sole shining genius in the story. The hum of the servers seemed to grow louder. The grief I felt began to curdle, to harden into something else, something colder and sharper. Resolve. I couldn't just block him, that would be too easy. He'd just assume my security was better than he thought and move on, the lesson unlearned. The disrespect would remain, festering. No, I needed to understand the why. What was so important that he would risk this? So I let him continue. I watched from the shadows of my own system as he kept probing, kept testing. He was good, I had to give him that. He was methodical, but his arrogance was still his weakness. He assumed he was the only player on the board. While he was focused on my external firewalls, I shifted my attention to his digital trail. I analyzed the fragments of code he was using, the specific tools he'd deployed, and in a temporary file on one of the proxy servers he'd used, a file he thought was securely wiped, I found it, a breadcrumb, a snippet of a project plan. It was titled Angel Investor Initiative. It wasn't a formal Veredix document. This was a side project, his own. The plan was audacious to build a proprietary trading algorithm, a secret project within Veredix, and he needed seed capital, angel investment. He was trying to become his own angel investor, using my retirement funds. I navigated to the firewalled section of my personal network where I kept my real financial data, the place he was so desperately trying to reach, and I saw the accounts he was targeting. It wasn't my checking account, or a few thousand from my savings. He was after the big one, the consolidated fund from my years as Nick's. A sum that wasn't just comfortable, it was generational. It was the money that was supposed to be his inheritance one day, the fruits of a lifetime of work I could never tell him about. He wasn't trying to borrow a few $1,000s for rent. He was planning to gut my entire financial foundation for his pet project. The scale of the betrayal was breathtaking. He was willing to gamble my entire security, my future, on his own ambition. The final straw, the tiny little push that sent me over the edge from hurt to cold fury, came the next afternoon. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a text from Jace. My hands were covered in soil from repotting an orchid, and I wiped them on my jeans before picking it up. The message read, "Hey Mom, thinking of redoing the patio. I might be able to help you out with that soon. Big things are on the horizon. Talk soon." He had even added a little rocket ship emoji. A rocket ship, the sheer unadulterated audacity. He was casing my accounts, planning a multi-million-dollar theft, and simultaneously texting me with condescending offers of pocket money for my little garden projects. He was patting me on the head while picking my pocket. I looked at the phone, at the cheerful, oblivious message, and something inside me snapped. A quiet, clean, and total break. The love and hurt didn't vanish, but they were suddenly encased in ice. This wasn't just a misguided son making a terrible mistake anymore. This was a predator who saw me as prey. The scales didn't just fall from my eyes, they were blasted away. And in that moment of terrible clarity, a new thought took root, cold and sharp and resolute. It wasn't about revenge, not yet, but it was about to be. It was about to be about consequences. My son, the brilliant programmer, was about to get a practical, hands-on lesson in the subject he'd so clearly forgotten: respect. And class was officially in session. My resolve, once it hardened, was absolute. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of chilling calm. I was no longer a hurt mother, I was Nick's, and Nick's had a job to do. This situation was no longer a family drama, it was a security breach, and the perpetrator just happened to share my DNA. The first step was to understand the full scope of my leverage. Jace thought he was the one with the plan, the one moving pieces on the board. He was blissfully unaware that I didn't just own the board, I had designed the entire game. About 6 months prior, long before Jace started poking at my firewalls, I had received a highly encrypted inquiry from a man named Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Veridix. Thorne was a classic Silicon Valley shark, brilliant, paranoid, and obsessed with his company's valuation. Veridix was on the cusp of a Series C funding round, and their lead investors, a notoriously cautious Swiss firm, were insisting on a full, independent, and completely confidential security audit. They didn't trust in-house reports. They wanted a ghost, a legend, someone who could get inside the system, test it to its breaking point, and report back with unvarnished truth. They wanted Nick's. We had a video call, his face a carefully neutral mask, mine a voice-modulated audio feed with a black screen. He didn't know my name, my age, or my gender. He only knew my reputation. I named my price, a retainer so substantial, it would have made most people's eyes water. He didn't even blink. He agreed immediately. For that fee, I was his secret weapon. I was to be his silent, invisible auditor, with a mandate to find and document every vulnerability, every backdoor, every piece of sloppy code in his entire network. The audit was scheduled to begin next month. Jace, in his infinite arrogance, had just given me a reason to move up the timeline. My son's attempted theft wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a professional opportunity. It was his invitation written in code to walk right through the front door of his company, with his own CEO's blessing and a hefty check waiting for me on the other side. This wasn't just leverage, it was a legitimate contractually obligated mission. Still, the magnitude of what I was about to do gave me pause. This wasn't about teaching a teenager a lesson by shutting down his internet access. This was different. The potential fallout was immense, not just for Jace, but for the entire company he worked for. For a moment, the mother in me resurfaced, whispering doubts. Was this too much? Was there another way? I needed a sounding board, a voice of reason from the world I truly inhabited, not the one of suburban gardens and library bake sales. I picked up my encrypted phone and made a call. "Elias," I said when the secure line connected. "Samantha," a warm, gravelly voice replied. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you finally bricked your neighbor's smart lawnmower for waking you up too early." Elias Vance, known in the old days as Ghost, was my oldest friend. We'd met in the nascent digital world of the 1980s, on bulletin board systems where we were just disembodied handles, young rebels exploring a new frontier. Now he was a tenured professor of cybersecurity at a prestigious university, a man who had traded the thrill of the hunt for the quiet satisfaction of shaping the next generation. He was one of only 2 people on the planet who knew my real identity and the full scope of my work. I laid it all out for him: the probe on my firewalls, Jace's signature, the angel investor plan, the contract with Veridix. I told him everything, my voice low and steady, betraying none of the turmoil I felt. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Finally, Elias sighed. "Sammy," he said, using his old nickname for me, "we always knew this was a risk, raising a kid with that much talent in the shadow of our world. It's like raising a wolf cub and hoping it will be happy herding sheep." "Am I about to destroy my own son, Elias?" I asked, the question hanging in the air, heavy and raw. "No," he said, his voice firm. "You're not. Listen to me. The boy you raised, the one who marveled at Hello World, wouldn't do this. The man he has chosen to become, however, built an insecure system for his employer and is actively trying to steal from his mother. Nix has a contract to find vulnerabilities. This is not a mother punishing her son. This is a professional fulfilling a contract. The fact that the target of that contract is your son is his problem, a consequence of his own choices, not yours. You have to compartmentalize. You are Nix now, and Nix has a job to do." He then told me about a former star student of his, a prodigy he had mentored, who had recently been arrested by the FBI for orchestrating a massive ransomware attack on a hospital system. Elias's voice was filled with a familiar, weary sadness. "I blamed myself for a long time," he said. "Wondered if I'd pushed him too hard, praised him too much. But in the end, we give them the tools, Sammy. We can't force them to build something beautiful. Some of them will always choose to build a battering ram." His words were the final piece of the puzzle, the final shield I needed. He was right. This was about professional ethics. My personal feelings had to be firewalled off. I thanked him and ended the call, my path now clear. The first phase of the plan was containment. I couldn't let Jace succeed, but I couldn't just block him either. I needed him occupied. I needed him to think he was winning. So I built him a playground, a honeypot. Over the next 12 hours, I spun up a virtual mirror of my financial network. It was a masterpiece of deception, a digital Potemkin village. It had all the superficial architecture of my real accounts, the same login portals, the same 2-factor authentication prompts, but it was all a facade. Every keystroke he made, every line of code he tried to inject, would be logged, analyzed, and stored in a secure file. I would let him breach the outer layers, give him a taste of victory to keep him focused, while he was in reality wandering through a digital prison of my own design. While Jace was busy trying to pick the lock on a door that led nowhere, I turned my attention to Veridix. His clumsy, arrogant attempt to breach my network had been my key. He had used a company laptop, tunneling his connection through Veridix's own VPN for a brief moment before jumping to the external proxies. It was a tiny mistake, a moment of laziness, but it was all I needed. It was like he'd left a muddy footprint on the pristine white carpet of his corporate network. Following that trace back, I slipped past their outer perimeter defenses. It was child's play. The systems Jace had bragged about, the next-gen security he was so proud of, were like a screen door against a hurricane. Once inside, I was a ghost. I had full administrative access, granted to me by the CEO's own mandate. The audit began. I moved silently through their servers, their databases, their code repositories. And what I found was horrifying. It wasn't just a few minor vulnerabilities or some outdated software. The entire system was a house of cards, built on a foundation of arrogance and neglect. Customer data, including financial records and personal identification, was stored with laughably inadequate encryption. There were dozens of undocumented backdoors, shortcuts Jace and his team had built for their own convenience, leaving the network wide open. It was a monument to his hubris. He had prioritized speed and flashy features over the slow, boring, essential work of security. He had built a race car with no brakes. But then I found something far worse than mere negligence. Buried deep in a sandbox development environment, I found the real angel investor initiative. It wasn't just a plan, it was fully functional code, and it had nothing to do with a trading algorithm. Jace's real plan was a sophisticated siphoning scheme, a tiny, almost invisible parasite that would attach itself to Veridix's transaction processing system. It was designed to round down every customer transaction to the nearest cent and divert the fractional remainder, the digital dust, into a hidden, untraceable cryptocurrency wallet. It was theft on a massive scale, pennies at a time, from millions of users. Grand larceny disguised as a rounding error. My retirement fund wasn't the target, it was just the seed money he needed to get this scheme operational. He wasn't just practicing on me, he was preparing for a crime that would make him rich and send his company into a death spiral. And at the heart of the system, I found his ultimate vanity, a master key. A piece of code he had named, with a breathtaking lack of subtlety, Jace_God_mode. It was a universal override that would give him absolute, untraceable control over the entire Veridix network. He could alter records, transfer funds, delete logs, and lock out every other user, including the CEO. He had built a kill switch that only he controlled. I sat back, the evidence displayed across my 3 monitors, the honeypot logs showing his attack on me, the full schematics of his embezzlement scheme, the terrifying power of his God mode. This was no longer about a disrespectful son. This was about a criminal. The mother in me finally went silent. Nyx was in complete control now, and the silent takeover of Veridix had just begun. The game had changed. My objective was no longer just to teach my son a lesson, it was to document a felony and neutralize a threat, all without revealing my hand. The first move had to be subtle, a whisper in the machine that would sound like a scream in Jace's ears. While he was celebrating what he thought was a major breakthrough, he had successfully bypassed the first layer of authentication on my honeypot. I was making my first real move inside Veridix. I identified the most critical vulnerability he had overlooked. The encryption keys for the primary customer database were stored in a plain text file on the same server as the data itself. It was the digital equivalent of leaving the key to the vault taped to the vault door. With a few quiet lines of script, I moved the keys to a secure hardware-based key management system, a standard practice he had dismissed as too slow. I didn't change the keys, I just changed where they lived. Then I sat back and waited. The effect was immediate, and for Jace completely baffling. The next morning, a dozen of his core application features that relied on accessing customer data simply broke. The system was demanding an authentication token from the new key manager, a protocol his sloppy code didn't know how to provide. From my invisible perch, I watched the storm erupt on the company's internal Slack channels. I saw Jace's messages, first confident and dismissive, probably a network glitch, reboot the servers, then becoming progressively more agitated as the glitch persisted. He couldn't figure it out. The data was there, the server was online, but the lock had been changed, and he didn't even know there was a new kind of key. His panic was a fascinating thing to observe. He couldn't admit to his team that his own security design was so flawed, so he started blaming network latency, then a possible hardware failure. He was pulling his hair out, trying to diagnose a problem whose source he was fundamentally incapable of grasping. He was looking for a burglar, never imagining someone had simply reinforced the walls. 2 days later, I made my second move. I found one of the many back doors he had built for himself, a port he left open to bypass the corporate VPN so he could work from home without the hassle of two-factor authentication. It was a lazy, arrogant shortcut. I didn't just close it, I reconfigured the firewall to log any attempt to access that port and to immediately flag it as a high-level security intrusion. The next time Jace tried to use his personal shortcut, instead of a seamless connection, he got an access denied error, and unbeknownst to him set off a silent alarm that went directly to my logs, and per my new protocol to a secure folder on Marcus Thorne's executive dashboard. Now his panic began to curdle into paranoia. From his perspective, the system was actively fighting him. His tools were failing, his shortcuts were disappearing. He was a king who was slowly discovering his castle was rearranging itself in the dead of night. His messages to his lead developers became sharp, accusatory. He was convinced a rival company was launching a sophisticated cyber attack. He started pulling all-nighters, his code commits becoming more frantic and sloppy as he tried to patch phantom holes while I was methodically reinforcing the real ones. He was chasing ghosts, never once suspecting the main ghost was drinking chamomile tea and checking on her tomato plants. The beautiful irony was that he was now working harder than ever to fix a problem that was in fact making his own company more secure. He was an unwitting participant in his own undoing. The culmination of this phase came when I discovered his smoking gun, the detailed plan for his embezzlement scheme. The code was nearly complete. He had even set up the offshore cryptocurrency wallet where the siphoned funds would be deposited. He was planning to deploy the parasite code during the next major system update, hiding it within hundreds of other legitimate changes. I didn't touch it. I didn't delete it. That would have been too clumsy. Instead, I simply copied it. I took the entire project, the code, the business plan, the wallet addresses, his private notes, and packaged it into a neat time-stamped and cryptographically signed evidence file. This was the heart of my report for Marcus Thorne. It was no longer about finding vulnerabilities. It was about documenting a conspiracy. Watching him unravel was a strange, almost out-of-body experience. It was like watching a movie where you know the ending. His swagger was gone, replaced by a pale, haunted look in the video calls I could discreetly observe. The boy genius was gone. In his place was a cornered animal, snapping at shadows. He was so consumed with finding the external enemy, the corporate saboteur, that he never once looked in the one place he should have. He never looked back at the lessons he'd forgotten, at the mother he had so thoroughly underestimated. The silent takeover wasn't about breaking things, it was about fixing them. And with every security flaw I patched, every vulnerability I closed, I was tightening the noose he had unknowingly placed around his own neck. The pressure I was applying to the system began to create fractures not just in the code but in the human network that surrounded Jace. His power at Veridix was built on a cult of personality. He was the brilliant, visionary founder who could do no wrong. His team of young, bright-eyed developers revered him. They bought into his hype, worked grueling hours for him, and trusted his judgment implicitly. But as Jace became more erratic, that foundation of trust began to crumble. This was the family exodus phase, and his work family was about to leave him. The key figure in this was a young woman named Maya, one of Jace's senior developers. She was sharp, ambitious, and unlike many of the others, she hadn't completely drunk the Jace-flavored Kool-Aid. She was a true engineer at heart. She valued elegant, robust solutions, not just flashy demos. When the system started glitching, she was the first one to suspect it wasn't a glitch at all. While Jace was screaming about corporate sabotage, Maya was quietly analyzing the changes. She saw what I was doing. She didn't know who was behind it, but she recognized the work. The glitches were in fact incredibly sophisticated security patches, implemented with a skill level that far surpassed anyone on their team, including Jace. The closing of the back doors, the reinforcement of the encryption protocols, she saw it for what it was, a professional audit, a hostile one. Instead of reporting her suspicions to Jace, who was now blaming his own team for the problems, she started her own quiet investigation. She began documenting the original, flawed code that Jace had written. She pulled up his old code commits, highlighting the shortcuts and the vulnerabilities he had created. She was building a case, not to expose him, but to protect herself. She could see the writing on the wall. When the hammer finally came down, she wasn't going to be collateral damage. The community exodus had begun. His most talented lieutenant was secretly preparing to abandon ship. Jace, meanwhile, was spiraling. Blinded by his own ego, he was convinced he was the victim of a conspiracy to oust him from his own company. He saw enemies everywhere, in his competitors, in his investors, even in his own team. His desperation led him to make his final fatal mistake. He decided he needed to seize control. He was going to use his ultimate weapon, the Jace_God_mode exploit, to lock down the entire network, purge the attacker, and re-establish his authority. It was a move of pure panicked hubris. He planned to do it late at night, when system traffic was at its lowest. But he didn't know that I was waiting for him. I had anticipated this move from the moment I discovered the exploit. The God mode was his digital nuclear option, and I had already built my anti-ballistic missile system. The moment he initiated the sequence to activate the exploit, it didn't just give him control, it triggered a series of silent high-priority alerts I had embedded deep in the system's kernel. First, it took a complete instantaneous snapshot of the entire system state, providing immutable proof of his actions. Second, it sent a Level 1 critical alert directly to Marcus Thorne's personal encrypted device, an alert the CEO had been briefed to watch for. Third, and this was the part I was most proud of, it automatically revoked Jace's own credentials at the root level. The key he thought would make him a god would in fact instantly and irrevocably lock him out of his own kingdom. He was triggering his own execution. I watched it happen in real time. I saw him launch the script. I saw the system alerts fire off in my own logs, and I saw his connection to the server instantly terminate. On his end, his screen would have just gone dead. His access completely and totally severed. He would be hammering at his keyboard, but he was now just a civilian. A ghost, locked outside the very walls he had built. The fallout was immediate. Within minutes, my secure phone rang. It was Marcus Thorne, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Nix, it happened." "I see that, Marcus," I replied calmly. "The evidence package is being uploaded to your secure folder as we speak. It contains the full record of the attempt, as well as a complete report on the architect of this vulnerability, Mr. Jace Reynolds." There was a stunned silence. "Jace," he finally managed to say, "my lead architect? It was an inside job?" "It was always an inside job," I said. "You'll find all the details in the report, including his plans to embezzle from your customers." The next 24 hours were a blur of digital cleanup. With Jace locked out, I worked with Thorne's trusted internal team, a small group that did not include Maya, to protect her. to secure the system completely, using my report as a roadmap. And then, as I was finally closing my monitors and thinking about making a cup of tea, my personal phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I knew by heart. It was Jace. The message was short, stripped of all its usual arrogance. It was the message of a broken man. "Mom, can we talk? I'm in some trouble at work." The curtain was about to rise on the final act. I agreed to meet him, not at my house, with its ghosts of his childhood and the humming servers in the basement, and not at his sterile minimalist loft, a monument to his ambition. I chose a neutral space, a quiet, old-fashioned cafe downtown, a place with worn wooden booths and the comforting smell of coffee and old books. It was a place neither of us belonged, which made it perfect. He was already there when I arrived, hunched over a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was a mess. His face was pale and drawn, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights filled with panic. The cocky boy genius was gone, replaced by a haunted, desperate man. He looked up as I slid into the booth opposite him, his eyes pleading. "Mom," he started, his voice cracking. "Thanks for coming. I don't know who else to talk to." I just nodded, waiting. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "Something's happened at work," he stammered, twisting a paper napkin into a shredded mess. "It's bad, really bad. I think someone is trying to frame me, sabotaging the system, locking me out. They're trying to destroy everything I've built." He looked at me, a flicker of the old manipulative charm surfacing. "I know this is a lot to ask, but I might need a lawyer, a good one. Things could get expensive. I was wondering if maybe you could help me out, just until I clear my name." There it was. After everything, after trying to steal my life savings, after discovering his career was in flames, his first instinct was still to come to me for a bailout. The bank of Mom, always open, always forgiving. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the silence stretch between us. I looked him directly in the eye, my gaze steady and unyielding. The time for games was over. "The initial intrusion vector," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority, "was an authenticated IP address originating from your home network. It targeted the firewalls of my private financial server on Tuesday at precisely 2:17 a.m. The probe used a recursive algorithm with a variable declaration style that has been your signature since you were 15. The color drained from his face. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, his frantic story about being framed dissolving in the face of cold, hard data. He looked like a statue. I don't know what you're talking about," he whispered, but the denial was feeble, transparent. "Don't you, Jace," I continued, my voice still level. "Should we talk about the angel investor initiative, not the fake one you put in your notes, but the real one, the parasite code designed to skim fractional cents from every Veridix customer transaction, the one that funnels the proceeds to a shielded crypto wallet registered in the Cayman Islands? Or perhaps we should discuss your little vanity project, the one you called Jace_God_mode, the master exploit that you tried to trigger last night, an act that was logged, recorded, and immediately sent to your CEO." He just stared at me, his mind clearly struggling to process what was happening. The confusion on his face was genuine. How could I know these things? How could his folksy gardening mother possibly have access to the deepest secrets of his digital life? He let out a short, choked laugh, a laugh of pure disbelief. "This is a joke, right? Did you hire a private investigator? Who told you all this?" "No one told me," I said softly. "I saw it myself." I leaned forward slightly. "You and your friends at Veridix, you sometimes talk about the ghosts in the machine, don't you? The elite hackers who operate in the shadows. You have a name for the one you all consider the best, the one Marcus Thorne hired to audit your system." His eyes widened in dawning horror. He knew the name. Everyone in his world did. "You whisper about Nyx," I said, letting the name hang in the air between us. You admire Nix's work. You just never imagined she was the one who used to tuck you in at night. The final pieces clicked into place in his mind. The look on his face was something I will never forget. It was a cataclysmic collision of two irreconcilable realities. The mother he'd dismissed and the legend he revered were the same person. The foundation of his world, built on his own perceived superiority, crumbled into dust in a single silent moment. He wasn't just caught. He hadn't just been outmaneuvered. He had been intellectually and fundamentally defeated by the very person whose intelligence he had so casually, so cruelly dismissed. I have a contract with Marcus Thorne, Jace, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, a sad note of finality creeping in. And I always fulfill my contracts. I sent him my full, unredacted report this morning. What happens now is between you and him. I placed a $20 bill on the table to cover our drinks. I stood up, my purse in my hand, and looked down at my son, my broken, brilliant son, who was now just a shell-shocked man sitting alone in a cafe booth. The new reality had arrived. I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving him there to face it. It wasn't a moment of triumph. There was no joy in it. It was just the quiet, devastating, and necessary end of the charade. A week passed, a week of silence. I didn't hear from Jace. I didn't reach out. I spent the time in my garden, my hands in the soil, feeling the familiar rhythm of life and growth, a stark contrast to the destruction I had wrought in the digital world. The silence was a necessary space, a vacuum where the old relationship had been. I didn't know what, if anything, would grow back in its place. Then two things happened. First, Marcus Thorne called me. His voice was different now. The controlled paranoia was gone, replaced by a deep, genuine respect. He thanked me profusely. He told me that my report had allowed them to avert a catastrophe that would not only have destroyed the company, but could have landed him in prison. He informed me that Jace had been terminated, effective immediately. Thorne, in a surprising act of calculated mercy, had decided not to press criminal charges for the embezzlement attempt. The condition was that Jace would cooperate fully with the new security team, signing a draconian non-disclosure agreement and effectively vanishing from the industry. It was, Thorne explained, a professional courtesy, not to Jace, but to Nix. A gesture of thanks. He also informed me that my retainer had been doubled and the contract extended for another 2 years. I had become his permanent, invisible guardian angel. The second thing that happened came an hour later. An email notification pinged on my phone. The sender was Jace. My heart tightened. I opened it, bracing myself for a tirade of anger, accusations, or pleas. But the email contained only 2 words. I'm sorry, that was it. No excuses. No justifications. Just that. I stared at the words for a long time. I didn't reply. I knew it wasn't time yet. The apology wasn't the end of the journey. It was the first tentative step. A journey he had to make on his own. Maybe one day we would talk again. Maybe one day a new kind of relationship could be built from the wreckage of the old one. But for now, the silence was the only honest answer I had. So here I am, sitting on my porch, watching the sun set, Irma's purring on my lap. Am I at peace? I think so. It's a complicated peace, tinged with the sadness of a necessary loss, but it is peace, nonetheless. You know, it's a painful thing to realize that sometimes the greatest act of love you can show your child is to let them fall. To step back and let them face the full, unvarnished consequences of their own choices. We raise them, we teach them, we give them the tools to build their lives, but we can't build their character for them. That is a task only they can undertake. Respect, I've learned, is not an automatic inheritance of family, it has to be earned. And when it is betrayed, it has to be reclaimed, sometimes in the most painful ways. He saw a retired hobbyist who grew roses. He forgot who taught him how to play the game. But this was never a game. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. Not in the end. It was about principle. It was about the cold, hard line between right and wrong, a line I had drawn for him years ago and that he had chosen to cross. It was about the quiet promise I made to myself and to my late husband to use my unique skills to protect, to build, to secure the systems that people rely on. I never imagined that one day the system I would have to protect would be from my own son. But a promise is a promise, and I always fulfill my contracts. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it's a difficult one, and I'm sure many of you have faced your own moments when you've had to make a hard choice with the people you love. What do you think? Did I go too far, or was it the only way he would ever learn? I'd be genuinely interested to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and your perspectives, they help more than you know. If you found something to think about in my story, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. And don't forget to hit that little notification bell so you won't miss it the next time I have a story to share. We all have a story, and there's a strange comfort in knowing we're not alone in our struggles. Thank you for being here with me today.